Hello. Thank you so much for having us. I'm so delighted to be here and for the opportunity to speak with my mother in front of all of you and to share a little bit about our work and our collaborations that we've been doing together. And I want to just thank the Nebraska Historical Society for making my trip here possible and for platforming this conversation, and for RSLE for helping organize, and for Ben Cruz and for David Bristow for helping make this event what it is. And I'm really happy to see so many familiar faces. So I wanted to start off just with like a little bit of context, because me and my mom have been talking really in depth for a number of years about her experiences here in Lincoln. In 2021, I organized a series of paintings that were call and response, and I was asking people in the Black community here in Lincoln and in Nebraska, like, what are 5 ideas you think of as central to your understanding of yourself? And this led to like really long, really in-depth conversations about like who are we and what defines us, not on like a large scale, but on a very intimate level. And so my mom talked a lot about her spirituality, and those conversations were recorded in a podcast I had. And so that's kind of how this practice developed. And so I want to start off kind of maybe this is the painting that we made together in 2021 called Between Spaces. And you can see in the background, there's like prairie grass. And you talked a lot about identifying both with your relationship with God and with nature, and with being in between kind of cultural spaces in a way too, is something we talked a lot about in our interview. Do you want to say anything about the painting before we get into the formal interview questions?
It's one of the first paintings that she's done of me that I liked.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. You did a great job. And I think it just represents my place in Nebraska, where I find myself most comfortable. Mm-hmm. It's outdoors.
How did you feel about the process of the interviews themselves that we did?
You know, it was really fascinating. I've never been in a situation where somebody wanted to draw a picture of me and then took the time to find out who I was or what my perspective was, so that the picture would reflect not just the outside image of me, but a sense of my personhood. And she did that with other people as well, and they turned out quite beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you, Mom. Appreciate it. So moving on to our next slide. So I want to start off by asking just like a very broad question, which is, how did you come to live in Lincoln?
Okay. As you see in this picture here, I'm in the car because I was a baby, but my family was part of one of the migrations, is what they called it, from the South. We were in Vernon, Alabama. It was a very rural area. Though there was opportunity, there was limited opportunity for education and for jobs. My father was in the Air Force and had returned to the States, and he was in the computer field as a computer programmer. So he'd been looking for places where someone would accept a Black man. My mom, as you can see, is what they would call passing. My grandfather, Scottish, red hair, green eyes, but one drop of Black blood made you Black. And so they took off on a trek that my sister, Janice Neon Harrington, wrote the book Going North. And that's about our family leaving Vernon, Alabama, making the trek, some of the hazards of being a mixed couple traveling through the South during the 60s. There's a few stories that we've shared in our family, but this is how we came to be in Lincoln. My father came back and forth a few times, started on the base, and then we were in process of buying a house, but had to start in T-Town, renting a home. And so this is how we come to Nebraska, mm-hmm. as being part of that migration, looking for better opportunities.
Yeah. And I remember you told me a story once, which I think might be interesting for the audience. Just like, what were there any experiences you had, like when you drove from Vernon to Nebraska, or parent stories that your family told you? Because I know One story I know that Grandma mentioned to me is on that drive from Vernon to Nebraska, they were stopping for gas and someone mistook my grandmother for a white woman. And so there was even like tension then about a couple that's like two Black people, but not both of them are visibly Black. And so the tensions and the kind of struggles of that, of experiencing racism, like what are you doing with a Black man? So there's like some strife in that. But you also told me a really amazing story about someone helping you guys as you were driving.
Yeah. And, before I share this story, I think it's amazing when you think about what makes a community. And even with the abolitionist.
Abolitionist.
I always say it wrong. Okay. Okay. So the people who helped to abolish slavery, the community that they created for other people by opening their homes, opening their hearts. I think there's more in community in the nature of how you show hospitality than there is anything. And so my parents set off, and they had my sister and my brother in the car, and they were traveling. I don't know if it's one of the, looking for a home up here in Nebraska. I don't know that context, but the four of them took off, and in the process of driving, they ran out of gas. And for us today, running out of gas is not that big of a deal. There's a gas station within a mile of wherever you're at. At that time, not only is there an issue about where you find a gas station, they had certain published booklets for Black people so that you would know where it was safe to get gas. So here my family is in the middle of the night, broke down, no gas. It's a big deal. And there's a car that comes up behind them as they're stopped. And my mom, she throws a blanket over my brother in the back and says, "Don't make a word." She takes my sister, shoves her between her legs, puts her dress over the top of her. And my mom describes just being terrified on the inside, but doing everything just to stay composed. And so they hear the footsteps coming up to the car, and a light flashes in the window, and they're just tense. And the gentleman, just as gently as he could, says, "Is there anything I can help you with?" And in those moments, it's like, is this real? Is this really what you mean to do? And it turns out he was a pastor, and he just happened to be on that road. And he took them back to their home, got them fed, then went out the next day, provided them with gas, and got them back on the road. And that, for us, for my family, is a huge story, because in the mix of a lot of abuse at that time, to have that nugget kind of gives you hope in humanity, that maybe not everybody is as bad as they seem. So that's something that my mom and my dad, they stayed in touch with them for a long time. And it's a story that they passed down to us.
Yeah, thank you. I like that one. Yeah, and I think just following up with that, so your family comes to Lincoln. Grandpa was in the Air Force. And so how was your family received in Lincoln when you moved here? And this was around, so my mom was born in 1964, and then they moved to Lincoln around
1963.
I knew that, 1963. You heard nothing. Okay. But the family moved here in 1969. They kind of came back and forth because my grandfather was in the Air Force, so they were checking out different places to live. But what was the reception like in your understanding of the family?
Okay. So we moved into our home, the new home that we purchased, about 1964. And Lincoln at that time, there's 27th Street, and it's like a division between East and West. And so most Black families were on the west side of 27th Street. We did something kind of audacious, and we moved in on the east side of 27th Street. And the neighborhood was primarily Irish Catholic. And it wasn't all icy, but it wasn't warm. We'll put it like that. And my parents taught me that wherever you go, the likelihood of being received in a negative way is what's going to happen, because they'll see the color of your skin first before they know who you are. And so my mom is a great cook. And you can sway just about anybody with food. And so she taught us about getting to know people, even if they were icy, and taking them food or cutting some flowers. My mom is known for her garden. And so she just taught us how to break the ice by, again, showing hospitality. And it took a little bit of time, but within about 3 to 4 years, those people who had been, look at those Black people, sometimes not that nice of a word, they recognized who we were and invited us up on their porch to talk. We don't really have porches now, but back then, being invited to somebody's porch to have a glass of tea and to sit and talk was a big deal. So it started changing the direction.
And this brings me to my next question a little bit. What were your early experiences in the community like when you got here? And I know you talk about kind of wandering the streets and your first early experiences like alone in the community too, both the positive and the negative. So I'd love to hear more about that. Yeah.
And I imagine almost all of you, can remember those days of your mom sending you up to the store to get eggs or butter, things like that. There were so many grocery stores on the corner within 5-6 blocks of the house. So I was used to going up with my brothers and my sister to get something, or my brother and sister to get something at the store. But by the time I was about 7 or 8 years old, oh my God, we would never do that now. You could just go up to the store and get something. So I set off with my mom's permission to get like a coloring book. It was a big thing for me. So I'm on 27th Street, and I don't know if we have the slide of 27th Street.
Would you go to the slide of 27th?
There it is. So I spent a lot of time on this street in this area. And so I was heading north. And just as I got on the street, there was this pickup truck that was coming towards me, and they were honking and making noise. And I stopped, and then this person said, "Nigger, go home." And then the next thing I know, there's a beer bottle, and it hit me in the head, and it was full of beer, and it just covered me. And I was stunned. I was stunned. That was the first time anybody had ever called me a nigger before. And I went home crying to my sister. She's like 7 years older than me. And she held me, and she was so mad. And I'm like, what is that? What is a nigger? And so she explained to me the derogatory term and a little bit of where it came from. And what touched me was that she was crying. And it made me mad that somebody would make my sister cry, even though I'm the one hurting. But she cleaned me up, and it gave me a different perspective the next time I went to the street about maybe not going on the street and taking the alley next time and not being so visible. So that was one of my first experiences on that same street, just where you see the trees. There used to be a house, and he was a shop owner. His name was Mr. Wrigley. And he was like the exact opposite of that first experience. I would walk by, and he would be on his porch, and he would just say hi to me, and he was just consistent. And then it turns out, if you went on the same 27th Street, but going south, he had a little store. And most of the stores that I would go into, people would follow us around because we were Black. But at Mr. Wrigley's store, he would just greet me and say hi, and he'd greet me by name. And I knew if I went there after school that there would probably be a pop or some ice cream or some candy and a story. And he became a safe place. And in the summer times, his granddaughter would come down, and he would invite us into his home to play and to have a meal. And he taught me something that followed me into my life, and it's this appreciation for nature. on 27th Street of all places. But he could feed squirrels by hand. And so I would sit on his porch and he'd say, just sit here, just wait. And this little squirrel would come up and he would feed him. And it was something that I wanted to do that and did do that after learning from him. So living in the neighborhood was, again, this experience of gracious hospitality by another number of people who were white. My mom at that time, my father and her divorced, and so there were times where she was working 3 jobs.
Yeah.
Please, I just feel very grateful. But she was working 3 jobs, and so there wasn't a lot of time for us. And so I spent my time, there's a picture, the map, that has all these different places. All those different places were people, there we go, that I wandered around to. Some of them represent schools, but a lot of them represent people who took the time to create for me in Lincoln a sense of community by opening their homes, by including me. And it was a really great opportunity to learn the value of caring for one another.
Thank you. Thank you. And I also just want to add a little bit of context too. Like Lincoln was considered what's called a sundown town in the 1960s and the 1970s, which means if you were Black, you shouldn't go out after dark because it wasn't considered safe for Black people. And yeah, so T-Town was also a dividing line where it's like Black people were safe on one side of the street and not on the other side of the street, right? And so like that's what my mom experienced. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And also like T-Town is a really interesting and like diverse place. And so I'm excited to talk more about like about that. There's a few questions. So so moving forward. So what was your experience like as a student in Lincoln Public Schools? You also went to a private Catholic school, Sacred Heart. And how did your experiences in these 2 different environments vary?
Okay. So first I went to Hartley for kindergarten, and then I shifted to Sacred Heart, which is what you're looking at here, for the remainder of my grade school. So Hartley sat just off of, or still sits off of 33rd and Vine Street. And at that time, again, as I said before, it's a large Irish Catholic neighborhood, not a lot of Black people. There were Black people at Hartley. In my class, I was the only Black student. And that's my sister. That's Janice. Anyway, but at that time, there was an issue, not just with the students not knowing what to do with somebody who was Black, but also the teachers, which is what I hadn't expected. I hadn't expected older people to treat me different. And so when I got into school, there would be a tendency to comment about my hair, which was the traditional. I've got braids everywhere with little brackets on each one. So I go ching, ching, ching every time I move my head, and so it was very difficult of having the whole class call me nigger, to have the teacher set me aside from the rest of the class and not participate. It was my first feeling of like rejection from peers, and feeling like, well, maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe there's something not right. And going home, and my mom at the time, she's just like, we just got to fit in. It's like, look at my hair. Nobody else looks like this. Nobody braids their hair, or nobody does this. It's like, can you just let me take the braids out so that it's just long and straight, because my family is mixed. So my hair was down to the middle of my back. It's like, can we just do that? And then maybe I'll fit in. And my mom's like, no, you don't have to comb it out. No. So that went on, and it was a difficult year. And when I left from there and went to Sacred Heart, I was hopeful. I was hopeful because it's a religious school, so I'm thinking maybe the reception would be different. And my first grade teacher, she was very kind. She was very different from my kindergarten teacher, and so that was good. And there was a mixture of relationships. Everybody was still white. I was still the same, only black child, woman, female in the school. There was another gentleman who was black as well, very light-skinned, and he fit in more than I could with my my braids. And I made some friends, and so it felt better. But as I went on, there were specific people, sometimes teachers, sometimes nuns, students who were very racist and would tend to take my desk and tip it over every day after lunch, and I'd go in and have to pick all that up. I learned how to fight here. I learned how to fight very well so that people would leave me alone. But my mentality was starting to shift, feeling less safe, feeling more and more like there's something different about me, and I was starting to struggle with acceptance of myself and wanted to hide more, but didn't know how to.
Yeah, I think this is an important experience to talk about because it's like the experiences of Black people, when you talk about being in predominantly white spaces, this is one of them, right? Being in a classroom where you're the only student of color at times. So it's like, I think that's an experience I had when I was in elementary school. And I spent a lot of time like thinking I wasn't very pretty or like thinking things like that. And it's really hard. And then I had a similar experience to you where for middle school, I started going to a public, multiracial public school. And I was like, oh, I'm Black and proud, very happy to be here. You know, and like that was a really important transition. And I think after you went to Sacred Heart, you went to Whittier and you had a very different experience. And like you talked about like braiding hair in the locker room with like other Black girls on the track team and like these other sorts of experiences that create another context. So do you want to talk about how did your experience differ when you started going to public school?
Whittier is on the west side of 27th Street. So crossing 27th Street became an experience with more ethnic cultures than what I was experiencing on the other side in the schools. And what I realized going to Whittier too was that there are differences in Black culture, in Black ethnicity. It doesn't all mean the same thing. We don't all function alike, think alike. The family frames are not the same. And so when I showed up, some of the kids would go, "You don't have to talk like that around me." I'm like, "Talk like what?" "What are you talking about?" "That's right. You can just, talk like you normally do. This is normal. This is me." And they'd look at me like, "What?" And so, we'd still hang out together, but I started to realize there's something different again. And as it went, it's kind of like being introduced to a part of myself that I had not known before. And so there were girls who took me in, families who took me in, like the McWilliams family, and taught me about their way of being Black in this Black community. And when I got to Whittier Junior High, there was such a diversity, even amongst the staff. Mr. Simpson was very much into science, and he was very different from any other Black man who I had experienced. He didn't walk with a pimp walk. He wasn't talking in any particular way. He was just him. And then there was other people who were, walking with a pimp walk and having the hat and everything that seemed like a stereotype to me at the time. And it's like the stereotypes in me seeming to be what they would call an Uncle Tom started to have names and faces, and we started to get to know one another. And then all of a sudden it became quite different. It's like, this is my friend Sabrina, and her background and her history is different from mine. And this is Lori, and this is Michelle. And we all started to bond over things like athletics. We started to bond in being Black athletes. Your hair, your hair becomes an issue. And so we would get ready for track meets by sitting on the benches in the girls' locker room, one behind each other, and we would take turns just braiding each other's hair so that we were ready for the track event or gymnastics, whatever it was they were doing. And that was something that I had never experienced before in any of the other schools, this sense of connection. And you have the same kind of hair, and you have the same kind of experiences. And the stories were different, but our hearts as people were very much the same. So, yeah, I hope you all excuse me. It's so different speaking in front of all of you and then diving into the stories. Sometimes I find that there's more emotions than what I usually let myself feel. So thank you for indulging me with that.
Thank you. So the principal of Whittier was a Black woman, which is also pretty phenomenal for this time period to have a Black woman who was a principal. Mrs. Porter. And the school closed and is now owned by the university, which I would love for you to talk about, like this moment in time where you have a student-led protest of like 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds and 11-year-olds who are showing up to the Board of Education and saying, like, don't close our school. And they're writing on sidewalks and they're sort of being active in their community in this really beautiful way. And you were there at some of these at the hearing. So could you talk about like a little bit about the school and like the significance of this moment?
Yeah. And I wasn't at the hearing. I wanted to be. I feel like a recipient of a lot of work that was done by Martin Luther King, that was done by Malcolm X, that was done by the Black Panther movements. Sometimes you hear negative things and you don't realize the positive that came out of that. The freedom to just know as students, it's like, we can protest, we can make our voices known, and they're not insignificant. And so we really cherished Whittier, again, because it was such a diverse ethnic representation of both staff and students. And they made a place for us where, one, we felt valued, and we felt, I felt really, really empowered to love learning, especially science, and it just gave me a place. I felt like this is my school. And when they decided to close it, a lot of us are like, okay, what can we do? We can do something. And so we made signs. We planned to be part of a protest. We planned to go to the city council and say, this is why this school should stay open, and that's Sabrina up there in front, and Deb. I remember them, and Techie, and you can see on their faces, we lost, obviously, but the power to sit on Vine Street with a sign and say that there's value in this community was huge. My mom came and she's like, you're coming home. You're not staying here, because she knew the dangers of protesting. She'd seen it before, so she come home. But it's something that I kept with me. I've participated in other protests, speaking before the city council, against different political issues and things. And I value what I learned from both the teachers, the students, and that experience of being politically active and having a voice to protect what was our community, that we had formed. So, yeah.
Okay. And we touched on this a little bit, but how you built community amongst your peers as a student. You talked about like the protest and then also like sports. And so I have some really cute photos of my mom running track and doing gymnastics and basketball and volleyball. And I think there was a year you did 3 sports. One thing I think about is in 1972 is when they passed Title IX so that women and girls could like play sports in the United States. And my mom was a benefactor of that movement. So it's like you were doing all these sports. I don't think they teach gymnastics in public schools anymore, which I'm really sad about. That's such a cool sport to learn. But could you talk about, like how did you build community amongst your peers and anything more about sports that you wanted to touch on?
Sure. So for me, sports was my way into what felt like a closed community. On the school playground, you've got the little girls who are playing jump rope, and I could never fit into that. But what I could do is I could kick a ball farther than any other boy, and I could run pretty damn fast. So as a result of that, I tended to be one of the first 3 people picked on a team. And once I realized this is my in, I utilized that to get into places that normally I would be ignored. And in addition to that, I started to understand the tool, not just of sports, but of being articulate, the tool of education, where these things could take me, and the doors that were open for me, that if I chose, I could walk through them and make a better space, a better life for myself, and also make a place for my children when they came, that they would not have to go through the things that I faced. So sports was a big deal in that way. And it was a way to build relationships and see a lot of different places. So there was a lot of openings, I think, for a lot of athletes. But what I didn't realize, because again, I'm the recipient of so much, the movements that were taking place across the nation in the 80s, who knew that in 1980, 1982 was some of the first times that black football players were able to play in college level leagues. I didn't realize it was so late that those doors opened. But I took and take at that time all these things for granted that I was able to do it. And it was really quite a privilege because of the work that other people did.
Okay, thank you. All right.
And they gave us a tip that we were halfway through about 10 minutes ago.
Okay. Okay, great. And you're also a Christian, and that's a big part of your identity, and the way that you've conceived of your life and your spiritual life is a big part of that. I wanted to ask, what was the influence of the Black church in the community at that time, and what was your experience of it? It's also, of course, as we know, the civil rights movement, and so many of these movements are led by Black churches, and so I'd love to know what that was like in Lincoln.
Yeah. Again, so many stages were already set. So you've got the Black movement, and at the same time, you've got the Jesus movement going on. And when the Maxies, Al Maxey became one of the first Black police chiefs in Lincoln. His family was Christian, and his daughter introduced me to Christ and started taking me to church for the first time. I was a bit of a heathen before that. They showed that IGA grocery store. I ripped those people off so many times. I was a little hellion. But I met their family, and again, they started including me in their lives and showing me a level of love, even though I could cuss the wallpaper off the wall. They were really kind to me. And Michelle, my friend, his daughter, introduced me to Christ. And as a result of that, my life just changed. And I started going to church. And when I showed up, I knew nothing about church. There was a lot of, they called them the mothers of the church. And when I was trying to get ready for church, I'm like, what do you wear? I'm not sure what to wear. So I wore what I thought was a decent outfit. They informed me that my skirt was way too short and sent me home. And I came back in pants. It wasn't much better. But anyway, they started me on this path of one, recognizing that church is about relationship. I walked in and it wasn't like I said, I was really bad. I was used to going to a place called Grace United Methodist Church and stealing the donuts and the donut money. So that's what church was for me most of the time. But I went here and it was different inside. I went inside and there's like pictures of Native American chiefs, and there were people who weren't all Black. There was Native Americans and people who were Asian and cowboys. And there's just such a variety and such a mix. And they had this acceptance that I had not experienced before. I didn't have to change and be, other than changing the length of my skirt. I didn't have to change to be with them. And so Trago McWilliams, Art McWilliams, the McWilliams family, they were huge both in the community because Trago Sr. had been the one who made it possible for me to go swim at the municipal pool where Blacks were not permitted to go. But because of what he did, again, I was just the recipient of all these, I was able to go. And then his son, Trago McWilliams Jr., he was running the church at that time, and he made it a welcome place where it wasn't about the color of your skin. It wasn't about how much money you made. It wasn't any of those things, but it was about this ability to be in relationship with others and to love God. And so they taught me about relationship.
I love that. I have 2 more questions. Do we have time for 2 more questions? Okay, we're good. Okay, so I'm biracial. My dad is white, and they met around this church situation. And so I would love for you to talk about what was it like being in an interracial relationship in the early 80s?
Okay. So,
and raising me. What was that like? No, you don't have to get into that.
Okay. So for me, like I said, my family was mixed. And so it just seemed normal to see my mom who's super light, see my dad who's super dark, and the rest of us. It didn't seem different. And when I went to the T-Town community, what I'd heard was everybody was Black. This is the Black community. But that's not what I saw. There is a mixture of people. So for me, in my own life, it just seems normal to have both. And I don't feel uncomfortable one way or the other. The tensions that I encountered being Black with a white man in the Black community, whoever I was dating even before my ex, would be, what are you doing with that Black man? Or what are you doing with that white man? Or what are you doing? Always this challenge. It's like, this isn't just a person. This isn't just a man, who has a good sense of humor. He's a white man. And we had a trucking company, and we would travel to different states. And I remember going to New York, upper state New York, and having a man growl at me like a dog because of my color, And I go back to my ex and I'm like, we need to leave. This is, I don't know where we're at, but this is not where we should be. He's like, no, we're going into that restaurant and we're going to sit down and we're going to eat our meal from beginning to end. I'm like, I don't think this is safe. And we get in, and everybody stopped eating. They dropped their forks, and they stared at us. And my ex, he's braver than I am in some ways. He took me by the hand. We sat down. We could not get ordered for over a half hour, just to order. And he's like, we're not leaving. We're not leaving. And I'm sweating bullets. I'm like, my parents have told me all sorts of stories, and this is not a good setting, And finally, he went and got the guy, and he said, "You are going to serve us now." And we were able to eat, and then we left promptly. And I recognize, again, it's communities that foster either a sense of hospitality, a sense of welcome, a sense of just seeing a person instead of seeing color, or you foster this hatred that you pass to your children, and then your children, create a kindergarten class like what I experienced. And so my goal has been, whoever my children love, whoever my children have friends with, whoever I meet, is to treat you like a human being, and to treat you with dignity and respect, because that's what I want. And I believe if I foster that, if I plant that, other people will take to it, and it births community, a healthy community. Mm-hmm. So it's been a trip to be in a biracial relationship. But one of these days, I hope to land me a Czechoslovakian sumo wrestler.
She said what she said.
Yeah.
Anyone in the audience?
And I think it'll be all good. Good.
Okay. I think we should just stop there. No, I love that. Okay. I think we could go further to that question, but I don't know if we have time to, so I'm going to maybe wrap us up with the last question. Yeah, I'm going to do that. So this is my mom has been walking around photographing sycamore trees around the 27th Street neighborhood, and it's been
actually all over the place.
All over the place. So I'm going to end with the question, what values did the community in T-Town plant in you? And I know you got some stories for us about why is there a sycamore tree here also.
So Whittier Junior High is like one of the oldest junior high schools in Lincoln. And when I went back there, there's a sycamore tree. It's weathered, it's beaten a lot, but it's beautiful. And I started thinking about the name. It's John Greenleaf Whittier, and he's a poet. And he wrote this poem about not giving up, about not stopping, but hanging on like a tree, And there's a scripture about being a tree planted by streams of water. And so I went back and I looked up about sycamore trees, because as I started thinking about it, it's like a lot of Black schools have sycamore trees, a lot of civic places that are connected to Black history have sycamore trees. I'm like, why is that? And so, there's a variety of articles, but what I gleaned from them is that the sycamore tree, because the top of it is white, it is an easy signpost, guidepost. You can recognize it. They grow where there's water. So for slaves who were escaping, they'd be watching for these trees. And people who were abolitionists.
That's right.
They tended to plant them so that on the route going north, you would know you were on the right path. And I have 5 grandchildren, and 4 of them are boys and 1 is a girl. And as I look at this world, oh my goodness, I want to give them the values that I gained while, my family was in a tough spot, both being foreign to this place, having a mom who was single and couldn't really take care of her 3 kids as well as she would have liked, but to have a community who stepped in people who were strangers and didn't know me, and whether they were motivated by the God that I know, whose name is I Am, or whether they were motivated by just a sense of compassion or being in the same place. How many of us have been in the same place, of being someplace where we're not known, where we've not been accepted, and somebody's opened up their door, opened up their table, and said, come in. And I look at what's going on now, and I run into all sorts of stresses between people with different political views. But everybody likes to eat. Everybody likes to share a story. Everybody likes to be heard. And so taking the time to listen to one another, taking the time to see beyond those stupid signs, red, blue, signs in the yard, and see the person behind the sign. There's all sorts of, we call it racism, but I like the words prejudiced, bigotry, and biased. They exist no matter what color you are. You can do it against somebody who's of your own color. You can do it against somebody of the opposite color. But the thing about prejudice, the definition, is about judging somebody before you know them. So this has been my story of a community that got to know me and saw me beyond my color. Not everybody did that successfully, right? But a lot of people did. And some of those people here today. And so it's such a gift, such a gift. And I hope that we can give that to one another to create unity in our community, and that we make it our community no matter what color we are, no matter what beliefs we have, but that we really learn to love on one another. So that's the value, that's the seed that I hope that we can plant.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm glad.
Yeah. I'm really proud of her. Thank you all for being here. And do you guys have questions for my mom? Does anybody want to ask my mom a question? Or for me. That's good too.
Yeah.
Good news, it's for both of you. Also, I'm going to fangirl. Katharen and I have been a fan of yours for a very long time. Okay, so this is a question for both of you, but it's one question. Obviously, you can relate with your multiple, as far as growing up as a multiracial woman and however you define yourself. But when was the moment as a mom that you realized that, you understand her, but you'll never understand her particular things? And when did you get it as a daughter? And how did you guys reckon with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. She's not very bad.
We're good.
Are we gonna?
We're good. That way you don't have to run back and forth. I like running.
She likes running. Okay. This is actually one question I wanted to ask you. So I'm gonna build on your question. Let's make a little scaffolding. So I was thinking about what was it like also raising an interracial family? Because you talked about what it was like to be in an interracial relationship.
Okay.
Does that help? Okay.
Okay. So here's the first thing you should know. Yeah, he was white, but I've always been told that, brown genes are stronger. So when my first child was born and he was so white, I'm not joking. I grabbed hold of the umbilical cord and I made sure there was a connection, because I'm like, something is seriously wrong. So I got rid of all the hair products that I had planned to use for them, because no, all of my children are very pale. Their hair texture is not my hair texture at all. And, for the most part, I think, again, there's a lot that's the same. And if you connect to the heart of a person, she shares with me who she is. And that's how I get to know her. Her experiences, especially as she was getting into college and ran into a different form of bias, prejudice, and bigotry, and was running into it with other girls who were maybe of darker skin tones or different, the conversations came up and I recognized, okay, I may not be able to walk you through your exact experience. I can listen to how she feels and speak to her heart, but some of this, it's just like if you haven't done something before, you just got to go through it. And so it's been walking with her through it that I've learned to understand what it's like from her perspective. Did I answer your question?
I think it was good. I liked that.
Okay.
Yeah. I think when I was really young, I'm going to be really candid with you guys. When I was really young, I had a lot of racial dissonance. Like I didn't always understand, because there wasn't a lot of representation of interracial relationships when I was growing up. So I was like, is this weird? Like that we're all connected in this way. And so I think it wasn't until later, I had always thought of myself as mixed. And then it wasn't until later that I really began to identify with my Blackness and understand even experiences that I had that were explicitly racist, that I was like, oh, because I'm mixed, I can't be explicit. I can't be experiencing racism. And so kind of finding my language and finding ways of talking about my experience was something that definitely happened over time. Yeah, I really appreciate my mom's experience, and there's things that my mom's experienced that I've never experienced and I never have. Thank God, really, because some of it is just so hard. And then, yeah, it's like having people ask you all the time, what are you? We're so it's and that's also another thing. I was just in Coyantes, Mexico, with my friend David, and it was a really beautiful experience. I was in an Afro-diasporic community where many people were Black and Mexican and multiracial, and they were like, oh, there's a Black American coming to our community, and they saw me and they were like, wait, where's the Black American? So and so experiences like that can be hard for me, but then I also think of it as an opportunity to talk about Black American experiences historically, because it's like my grandma looks very similar to me today and she was just as Black in 1930 as I am now. And so thinking about her experiences and my experiences, and that there's been multiracial and mulattoes throughout time. So I feel very comfortable with who I am, and my experience of Blackness is just as legitimate as my mom's experience of Blackness, even though they're both really different. And that we make space for one another to be who we are is really valuable to me. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.